So, Steven Spielberg's newest film, The Fabelmans, has just come out on premium video on demand after just a couple short weeks of theatrical exclusivity. As depressing as it is that the man who has arguably done more for the modern film industry than anyone else has had his most personal film yet relegated to streaming content, it's also very quickly becoming the norm. While it's easy to point out that traditional harder sells are going digital very quickly, such as films like Armageddon Time and The Northman, it's also happening with intended tentpoles that underperform. This summer's Lightyear went to Disney Plus after just a month of release, and Thanksgiving hopeful Strange World is following suit. Now, while all of these films certainly vary in quality, they all equally reflect a lack of audience interest in seeing these films theatrically, which is especially disappointing in the Fabelmans case, because this movie is almost entirely about that unique sensation of that theatrical experience. But enough doom and gloom about the current state of the modern film industry. I want to take a look at what I think is the most underappreciated part of the Fabelmans. It comes about 2/3 of the way through the film and essentially functions as a 45-minute digression from the main narrative. It puts Sammy's familial conflicts on the back burner and rather chooses to explore him navigating high school, girls, bullies, and his identity as a developing artist. Now, this section has been criticized for hurting the overall pacing of the film, as it basically abandons much of the internal and external conflict that's been developing up until this point. However, when you put it in the context of Spielberg's career more broadly, it becomes clear why he made that choice. In 1999, Spielberg went on Inside the Actor's Studio with James Lipton, who famously proposed him a question that basically already had the answer laid out.
Your father was a computer scientist. Your mother was a musician. When the spaceship lands, how do they communicate? They make music on their computers, and they are able to speak to each other.
And you see, I'd love to say, I intended that and I realized that was my mother and father, but not until this moment.
This exchange highlights how the divorce of his parents has followed Spielberg throughout his career, and his filmography shows a story that he's been aching to tell for decades. And while much of the runtime is dedicated to exploring this familial relationship, the high school section of the film gets at that exact question of authorial intent that Lipton addresses. When Sammy shoots the senior ditch day class video and premieres it at prom, his two anti-Semitic bullies react differently to their different portrayals. Logan, the school's resident jock, is glorified throughout the film, while Chad, Logan's scrawny best friend, is highlighted for his drunkenness and overall pathetic situation. While Chad is angered and humiliated as Sammy intended, Logan breaks down in tears over his positive portrayal, struck by his feelings of comparative failure. When he asks Sammy why he portrayed him that way, Sammy doesn't know, and he says he didn't intend for it to cause this, to which Logan replies that it doesn't matter what he intended.
I made you look like you could fly. But I can't fly. I can outrun any guy in Santa Clara County, and I'll work real hard to do that. But you make me feel like I'm some kind of failure, or a phony, or like I'm supposed to be some guy I'm never gonna be. Not even in my dreams.
Jesus, it wasn't supposed to make you upset. I didn't mean to freak you out. I didn't mean...
Who cares what you meant?
Chad, however, lashes out in direct anger over this humiliation, and while Logan isn't entirely on good terms with Sammy now, the film was enough to make him defend Sammy from Chad's continued attempts at bullying.
Fabelman!
Oh, shit.
You liar! You backstabbing liar! I'm gonna beat your...
This idea of authorial intent is one that drives much of media and literary criticism since French literary scholar Roland Barthes' seminal work, The Death of the Author, and the notion that the text can evolve beyond authorial decisions to take on a life of its own is what anchors the second half of this film. Barthes essentially contends that the meaning of a work doesn't have to be imbued by the author. If someone reads a book or watches a film and they interpret it in a way that isn't intended by the author, screenwriter, or director, that doesn't mean that interpretation isn't valid. There are plenty of ways that art can accidentally convey something, and as much as we might like to credit every observation we make to the intentions of the filmmaking master, sometimes these observations come more from our end as the audience than from his end as the director. Sammy doesn't know why he made Logan look like he could fly. He also doesn't know why it would make Logan react that way, but that doesn't invalidate how Logan felt. So this begs the question, who wrote that part of the Ditch Day film? Barthes writes about the idea of the implied author, an imaginary third party that can be credited for the unintentional decisions made by the artist that have an effect on the audience. Sammy is confronted by Logan with questions that only the implied author can answer. or perhaps one that only Logan can answer through introspection. In this exchange, Spielberg captures a moment in which his autobiographical protagonist learns of the disconnect between authorial intent and audience interpretation, serving as both a powerful humanistic sequence and also a rumination on the theory behind the craft. Yet, as powerful as this scene is, this section of the movie is getting a lot of flack for that disconnect. But when you think about it as a meta-commentary on Spielberg's own career, it's clear how this idea is directly related to the story of his parents. His work has always drawn on these childhood experiences, whether intentionally or subconsciously, and this sequence illustrates how those directorial impulses came to fruition. It's a formative lesson in filmmaking that Spielberg, and presumably Sammy, will go on to employ throughout a career that evokes his parents' divorce at every turn. Spielberg has talked about how he wasn't prepared to make this film until both of his parents had passed away, and it's clear that this film is a personal statement primarily intended to bring about his own emotional catharsis. While these two plot threads might not be narratively tied, they are thematically two pieces of the same complex emotional puzzle that Spielberg is likely still working on to this day. And that's why I think this sequence is not only fitting, but imperative for understanding all that The Fabelmans has to offer.